The phrase coastal living still conjures a very specific image of sea glass, starfish on the mantle, blue stripes. It was a look anchored in a very specific time and place. But lately, coastal design has undergone a massive cultural evolution. It has shifted from a literal theme into more of a philosophy, a quiet, disciplined expression of luxury that's much less about beach kitsch and more about how we interact with light, space, and nature. So, how did a regional design style become a global standard for livable luxury? Today, we are diving into coastal spaces, exploring how material choices and a sense of place shape the homes that we build, and why the human urge to design sanctuaries near the water is as old as civilization itself. To help us unpack this, I am so excited to welcome Krista Watterworth Alterman to the show. Krista is a nationally recognized interior designer, creative director, and the force behind Krista Home, which now operates as the luxury division of Vesta. With over 2 decades of experience, Krista has designed multi-million-dollar private residences and legacy resort destinations across the US, the Caribbean, and Mexico. You might also recognize her from her work on HGTV. Krista is famous in the design world for pioneering what she calls the quote-unquote new coastal edit, an aesthetic defined not by passing trends, but by architectural discipline, layered texture, and longevity. Her work has been celebrated in Architectural Digest, House Beautiful, Luxe. What I love most about Krista's approach is her belief that high design must translate into real emotional life. So, here's my conversation with Krista. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host of the Grandma Silver podcast and founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma Silver. Krista, I'm excited to chat with you today. This is going to be a really fun conversation. I'm excited to hear all about you and your work. Tell everybody who you are, what you do, so that sets the tone for the rest of our conversation.
Of course, absolutely. I am Krista Watterworth Alterman. I am the creative and executive director of Krista Home, which is a Vesta home company I was acquired a year ago. And I run a luxury interior design practice in South Florida.
How did we get here? How did we get into interior design? That's a big
Back up.
question. Let's talk about how you got into interior design first.
So I actually did it a little opposite than most people. I started out on HGTV hosting DIY renovation shows, and I had a couple of my own shows. I fell in love with design itself, even though when I started, I had a full art team and production team, and I really didn't do any design. Believe it or not, back then, design was not done by the hosts. The format on HGTV has completely changed. Then what happened was I loved it so much. I went to school, I studied at Parsons, and I built my own design firm in Manhattan, moved to South Florida and Palm Beach County 16 years ago, and the rest is history.
What you do so beautifully is coastal homes. And one of the questions that I was curious about is how we kind of landed on those landscapes. You started in New York and then moved to Florida. How did we get into kind of being known for luxury coastal design?
That is a great question. We do call it the coastal edit because I feel like coastal design is all about editing. The reason that is because for me, coastal design is about an energy. I like to call it the vacationing spirit. And I think that's what drew me to South Florida to begin with. Partly our family lives here as well. And that was kind of the reason why we came down. But we could have chosen to stay in New York City and run that crazy life. Of course, if I stayed there, I may not have become a coastal designer. So we don't really use that word coastal so much because it really is an energy, it's a feeling. And when I say a vacationing spirit, that means something to people. And it doesn't mean the same thing to people. Like everybody has a different idea of vacation. My son is in Stockholm right now with his friends. They're at a huge amusement park. For him, that's a vacation. That's not a vacation for me. I want to be by the ocean, relaxing, reading a book, a glass of rosé in my hand. So creating that vision and that feeling
Yeah.
is super important. And that's where we start. It's starting with that feeling and that energy and then going from there.
Understanding that. How are we taking that energy and how has it informed what you think about home or how you think about home?
I think the layering of things that feel good are what's important to luxury coastal design. When you think about going on vacation, you think about things that make you feel good.
Mhm.
And for us, layering in those elements that to the touch are soft, to the eye are inviting. And that usually means a lot of like linen and boucle and warm, earthy materials and those types of elements that calm the soul and calm the spirit.
What I'm hearing from you is that it's really informed by coastal living.
If I were to help people envision it, I would say the spirit has an energy to it. Let's just start there. And I want that to be implemented anywhere in the world geographically.
Mhm.
If you live in a high rise in Chicago in the middle of winter and it's freezing, I've lived there. I know. I used to come home with icicles on my eyelashes. Okay. It's freezing. But if you have a home that is designed in this way, this vacationing spirit, you walk into this home, no matter what's going on in the world, and you get a sense of the chaos ends and there's your shoulders drop and there's a sense of, ah. And so we have to start there, right? And of course, again, that means something different to everyone. And I was taught that in order to implement a certain style, a certain feeling, a certain energy, you have to tap into the homeowner, the people who live there. It has to speak to them. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't certain things that create a sense of style, but that not only energy, but sense of let the chaos go is really what all people are looking for. That goes across all channels in all areas of life, in all areas of the country and the world. So it really is translatable. I want people to feel that way instead of this coastal style that is more thematic and less interesting.
So if we take people's personalities and what their energy is, and when we infuse it into a space that is so closely associated with geography, how does that blend come together for you? Because the other element here that I wanted to talk about is that coastal, if we use that term, is kind of broad. What you see in the low country is entirely different from what you'll see in the Keys and is different from what you'll see in Nantucket. Those energies are all very different and their aesthetics are different. What the people's routines there and those communities look very different. So how does that play into everything?
I think overall, no matter where you are, and you're right, I grew up in Connecticut. I been to Cape Cod, Nantucket my whole life. South Carolina, North Carolina all have different feels. Florida, California. I mean, when
Yeah.
you think about environments that are on the ocean, right? Oceanfront and supposedly coastal. Yes, there are different styles that come into play. There's traditional style, there's the more modern style, there's the California organic style of coastal. But I think what they all have in common is less is more. Even in the more traditional homes, when I walk into a very, let's say, traditional Palm Beach home, there's a lot of pattern, there's a lot of textiles, there's a lot. Let's just stop there. There's just a lot. But if you go into a home that is designed in a way that is meant to feel good, no matter the style, there will be less. And I think that that's probably the one thing that is the through line in all coastal design styles.
I am curious if we can go backwards for a hot second, fully understanding that you are familiar with a lot of coastal communities. How have those influenced your personal taste?
So I grew up in a very chaotic home, a chaotic, dysfunctional home. So my vision for life and
Mm.
my passion for what I do comes from creating a dream that I always had, whereby I knew that home could be a respite. I knew that home could be a beautiful place to land at the end of the day. The very beginnings of my, let's say, excitement and desire for interior design started when I was pretty young. I was probably 7 or 8. I used to go to my aunt's house every summer and stay with her. She was my godmother. She was an amazingly classic Connecticut woman, well dressed at all times. Her house was the first house that I ever saw that was a professionally designed home. What I found there and being with her in that environment brought me so much joy. I felt so loved that my vision for design comes basically from, and my passion and obsession, I would say, comes from that place, that feeling, that energy. That's something that I want to bring to every client's home. It tends to ride the coastal train because, yes, the environment here is the ocean. And of course, the ocean is known to bring us a great sense of calm. Her home was not a coastal home, but it had that vacationing spirit. And it was a very traditional home, but it felt good to be there.
Her home, despite not being coastal, had the vacationing spirit. So was that more of a peacefulness for you? How would you define it in that context?
Absolutely. I would say it was peaceful. It was full of love. It was full of light. It was well put together, though. It was very tailored. She had beautiful millwork. She had handmade antiques. She had historical elements throughout her home that were very Connecticut. And it was a relatively historical home. So I was brought up with a respect and a love of that through her. But there wasn't a lot in her house. It wasn't overdone, and everything was soft and felt good, and you can fall into the sofas and the chairs. You could put your feet up on the coffee tables. Even though everything was stunning, there was a sense of relaxation, and I think that's also a big part of coastal design.
I was going to discuss sort of the luxury of it all, how we would define or distinguish luxury design from other forms of design. Would you argue that part of your aunt's home being sort of this less is more environment is part of that?
We're working on homes that are sometimes 20,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet. These are large, encompassing projects. And I think, honestly, a sense of luxury, no matter who the client, no matter how much money they have to spend, has to have a sense of place for them, a functionality for them that makes them feel good being in the home at all times, from room to room, from a holistic perspective. It can't just be they drop into the middle of the home and there's a sense of luxury and their shoulders drop. It has to be from room to room, and it has to be a livability that is felt whenever they're there. And whoever comes into that space needs to feel and get that sense. That means that luxury is different for everyone. A lot of luxury today is founded by wellness, especially for professional athletes. We're doing a ton of wellness retreats. We are focusing on wellness in general for their family and, for connection. So that's a big part of luxury today. And yes, at the end of the day, is it about amazing craftsmanship, working with the best in the business, creating a product that is in of itself spectacularly luxurious because of the materials we're using, the marbles and the things that were getting shipped in from Italy and from Spain, elements that are handmade. Yes, there's that kind of luxury, of course, and that is part of it. But at the end of the day, luxury nowadays, I think, is a feeling, and that feeling comes from this coastal environment and this vacationing spirit, I think.
When you have these huge houses, a big part of that vacationing spirit is comfort. So what are some of the things that you like to make sure to focus on to ensure that they don't feel too sterile, that they are comfortable despite their square footage?
It's a challenge. It's always a challenge. The one thing that makes a very large space in general for me feel good is layering. And it's the layering of textiles and materials and finishes. It's soft rugs and soft materials and soft upholstery and beautiful drapery and wallpaper and all of these things that give a sense of closure to a space
Mhm.
without making them feel closed. So, I mean, we have a client who has 19 acres in Wellington. There's 3 homes on this property. They don't live here full time. The vision for this design for them is a connection to nature. They only come here to Florida to connect to their surroundings. This home is not on the water, but it's surrounded by preserve. It's a huge piece of land. But what
Mhm.
they want when their kids come here is they want them to roam, they want them to feel free, and they want them to connect with wildlife and with all of the things around them. And they want the home to express that as well. And so that's a different kind of vacationing spirit. I wouldn't necessarily call it coastal, but it definitely has that same feeling.
I wanted to ask you more about this concept of focusing and integrating wellness into the experience of home. Could we elaborate on that a little bit?
I think wellness has always been something that I've wanted to bring into my practice. And I've certainly taught my design teams, that it should intrinsically be part of every project. It does come in different forms. Nowadays, we're doing infrared saunas, we're doing cold plungers, we're doing hot plungers, we're doing wellness rooms, we're doing massage rooms, yoga rooms, gyms create a sense of wellness. I learned so much from the people around me and from what their needs are. Professional athletes have very specific needs around wellness and around self care. I did the owner of Planet Fitness's home. I got to work with the designer that does all of his gyms. I learned so much about how to make a gym feel good, not just like a gym, but a place where you can actually not only feel good about your body, but rest and rejuvenate. That's all in the materials and in the selections and the way that rooms are laid out, even when it comes to that. We're doing the owner of Orange Theory's house. He has an amazing sense of what wellness means. What I've learned from him about the restoration of the body and how that plays into the design of the home. So we have circadian rhythm lighting throughout homes. That is all part of smart technology. Also, a big part of design nowadays. We're doing a few homes where people are really requesting that, asking for that. I think it goes bigger than just selections. It
Mhm.
is about a lifestyle in that sense.
Something that I noticed in looking at your work, it feels very rooted in its surroundings rather than sort of like imposed upon them. But I'm curious about what your thoughts are on how architecture should respond to its location.
The imposition of modern architecture in a very historic arena is offensive to people. And that I understand. I think it says something about the American way. It says something about progress. It says something about the ability to have the freedom to do as you wish with your property. But at the same time, there has to be a respect for a sensibility, and especially in certain geographical areas. What we do when it comes to design, no matter the architecture, is to do as much as possible to make a home fit in to its environment. Even with new construction and with renovation, I'm a lot of times designing from the outside in. We're cladding homes in materials that are part of, let's say, the natural landscape. We're trying to make more modern homes fit into more historical environments by the way we're landscaping, by some of the ways that we're architecting columns and exteriors, even on modern homes, to make them work and fit within this very specific style. And I work on a lot of different, we're doing a lot of modern homes right now. And to me, it's super important to be utilizing materials that are local and to be utilizing that sense of style from the outside in different ways and making more modern architecture fit in to these more traditional forms to a degree so that it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb.
Do you ever glean inspiration from older properties and bring that into your more modern properties?
If I see another white shaker kitchen, though, please, somebody, I can't. No more. But yes, I have a love and respect for that type of traditional millwork and wainscoting and all of those, shiplap or beadboard or any kind of tongue and groove, those kinds of elements that I grew up with that I love that are gleaned as more traditional. I do try to bring some of that into every project because it is timeless. And I think that a home will feel good 30, 40 years from now if you have some of those classical elements.
What about your clients' personal histories? You have athletes. I mean, that's travel. Most of them are not playing and living where they grew up at this point. So when you're working with someone who has, is a transplant, how are you weaving in their personal histories, those environments to make them feel natural without feeling it doesn't belong?
It's a conversation. Good design is about listening. I think it's the one most important talent that a designer needs to have. And it's funny you say that because we are building a home in one of the luxury communities here in South Florida. The home was architected for the client in a really contemporary way. He did not want that, and he showed a very traditional home from Martha's Vineyard, cedar shakes, and the whole shebang, and said, I want this. Gables and pitched roofs and, all of this completely different than how the home was architected originally. Now, this is a new construction. So the conversation starts there, whereby you have an architect who usually is very opinionated. I hate to say that, but they are, as they should be. They should stand by their work and be strong about what they represent as artists. And a conversation between us as the designers and the client, who clearly loves that traditional coastal style. It's a fun conversation at that point, but everyone has to kind of give and take. And when you have really great experts in the room that can do that can collaborate and get the client to where they need to be, is the most amazing feeling.
When I was a wedding planner, I very much felt that way about vendor relationships. You have the vendors who would be excellent collaborators and wanted to be part of a team. And then there were other vendors where, I felt like I had to advocate for the client as the planner. And so it reminds me of that relationship a little bit.
I definitely feel like the mom in the room a lot of times, because I'm dealing with big developers, big architects, and usually clients are relatively people who have strong opinions and they're successful for a reason. I have learned, yes, I can go toe to toe with these particular types of individuals, but I tend to be the one that's the advocate all around for finding a common ground. The second biggest part of design, aside from being a great listener, is being able to problem solve creatively.
If we talk about the elements for a moment, because I kind of just keep coming back to this vacation mindset that you've talked about, the spirit of it all, the energy of it all. Water is a really big part of coastal living, but as is light. How does that impact how you design?
Light is joy. Like light
I love that.
represents such joy, and I wake up every day, as all of us do that live here in South Florida, and cannot believe the sun is shining again. Like, I can't believe I live here. The sun is shining again. It brings such joy to the hardness of life. The more light in a home, the better. I am so driven and fascinated by ways to bring more light into every project because it really is the heart of happiness. It brings the lightness to everything, not only physically, but emotionally, mentally.
How do we take light and work with it throughout the day? Bright, sunny all the time. That sometimes is what you want. Sometimes it's what you're trying to get away from. Like, how do you balance that?
Big part of what we do is being able to control light because you're right, it is unforgiving down here in South Florida. the only way to really do that in interiors is with layering window treatments and doing that in a very intelligent way. We do a lot of, multiple window treatments on every window. We've got blackout shades, we've got solar shades. Everything's hidden away. All the ugly things are hidden up in the drapery pocket. And then layering in soft linen drapery or drapery that's light and fresh that can also be closed or opened. Everything being electric is also a really big part of how we control light in a way that is very luxurious.
Mm-hmm.
So, and being able to control it at the touch of a button, super important. But you're right, it is unforgiving. And we use a lot of not only natural light, but artificial light, and making sure the artificial light reflects the same sensibility as the natural light, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's also a big part of how we design, not only in light fixtures, but in the way that the home is architected. We use a lot of tricks to make sure that all the light is warm. It feels like natural light, even in the nighttime.
You're talking about window treatments, and then my brain went back timelessness, tradition. How do we take those concepts and integrate them into coastal style? Because so much of coastal design leans a little modern.
Great craftsmanship gives a home timelessness. I think when something is well made,
Mm-hmm.
beautifully constructed, has a respect for the selections of materials, it is timeless. Like, I was in a home last week that was 30 years old. That's old for us here in South Florida. 30 years old because we have so much new construction and so many people moving down here. A lot of building, a lot of just growth, which is very exciting. But, when I go into homes, and I went into this home last week, it was 35 years old, stunningly architected, beautifully built. Materials, solid wood doors, oak flooring, these elements that were so beautifully implemented and constructed, they still look stunning. I will walk through that house and I said, "You don't have to do anything here. We just have to buy furniture." I think that's what it is. At the end of the day, it's a sense of craftsmanship that creates not only a sense of luxury, but a sense of timelessness.
You've touched on materials a handful of times. Could we talk about that for a minute?
Like a lot of people will say, can we use wood floors, in a very humid environment like South Florida? And the answer is absolutely yes. Down here, the way we construct our homes is in such a smart way to adapt to the
Mhm.
environment. We have the most amazing air conditioning in South Florida. When I go back to New York City, when I go see my family in Connecticut during the summer, the windows are open. The air conditioning is hardly ever working. You can't function that way in Florida, right? It has to be smartly architected and functioning properly for the environment. That's number one. So that means that all materials are a go. I love authentic materials. I love authentic marble countertops. I love real oak flooring. I love the materials that bring out a sense of earth. They come from the earth. And those are my favorite types of projects.
One of the things that if we stick with this vacation mentality and just living in an area where you can be outdoors, hospitality and entertaining come to mind. And I talk about that a lot here. It's a very social, vacations are social when you want them to be. There are opportunities. Being outdoors year round just naturally provides a lot of opportunity for socialization. And so I'm curious about how you bring hospitality and entertaining into your design conversations and what that looks like implemented.
It's so important. Me and my team are architectural designers. We design homes, again, from the exterior in. So we're
Mhm.
working with landscape architects. We're consulting with pool designers. We're consulting with, all exterior elements on the home to ensure that the design is speaking toward functionality. Because your pool, your lanai, your summer kitchen, all of these elements are so important to the way we live in Florida. They are like another part of the home. They're treated as if they're another room, and we design them that way. The lanais, or the exterior porches in our homes, now we're doing them with drop-down screens that are also hurricane safe, so that if people want to be outside, it's windy, it's a little tropical, you're protected. You're protected against other, elements in the environment that aren't fun, right? But you could still be outside. So the functionality of the exterior room is key and intrinsic to how we function here in Florida and how we entertain. It is where we entertain. The fire pits and the outdoor bars and the outdoor, media areas and the fireplaces and all of those and the pool. The pool even needs to be designed for entertaining. So a big part of all of those things comes back to people connecting with each other, because that's what people do when they come here. You're right. We're outside all year round. I nap on my porch on the weekends. It's where I hang out with my kids and have parties and read alone. There's so many things that we do in the exterior. And so it is a huge part of how we design.
Having experienced the faster pace of the North, there is also a slower pace in the South. And particularly when you are literally geographically coastal, I feel like things really get a little slower. Do you design a home to adapt to the pace of life?
I think it's interesting because we do have a whole season down here, right? So right before Thanksgiving, it feels like you're in New York City. You can't get a restaurant reservation, traffic is horrible. Like, everyone's bringing their fancy cars down, so you've got big trucks on the road. It is quite energetic. We've got a bunch of New Yorkers down here, so no one's relaxing when you really think about it, because
It's true. They don't know how.
that's right. Which is probably my problem. But
You just design it for everybody else, and that it scratches the itch.
exactly. I think there's certain rules of thumb that I will follow, and I will sort of guide my clients through. No televisions in the bedrooms, if possible. Like, the primary, yes, but your guest suites, no televisions in those rooms. Let's put beautiful art. Let's make this a place where we disconnect. Also, how do we create spaces that celebrate light and control light? That's super important, because you don't ever want to be overwhelmed by your environment. You want to be able to control your environment. So that's super important too. We already talked about that. The sense of open space feels more like where you're actually doing things together in a large space, feels more like you're on vacation. Like, if you're sitting in a lobby of a hotel, or you're sitting by the pool, or in a guest suite in a hotel, the sense of being together and not necessarily talking, but being able to connect in spaces that are open and airy, where you can still feel like you're connected to each other, but you can disconnect when necessary. Whenever we're doing any kind of technology for the home, that all lighting has to be on dimmers, because you want to be able to control your light at all times, your artificial light. So we always put dimmers on everything, and no desks in bedrooms. We also pare back on offices, like office spaces,
Okay.
especially, you know what I mean? Because you don't need your Mac Daddy office here when you're when you're coming to disconnect from the world a little
Yeah.
bit.
I talk about legacy a lot on the podcast, and I have to imagine that when you're putting so much, obviously, of your clients into your work, because ultimately you're designing their homes, their spaces, it needs to feel like them, but you're also putting so much of your own energy and spirit and love into your work. And so I'm curious, when someone enters one of your properties, whether it's the homeowner or a visitor, what is it that you hope they first feel?
Well, first, I hope they start crying happy tears. That's number one. In television, we used to call that puppies and tears. They always wanted, that moment where puppies are so cute and they're so lovable, and tears always make people feel good if they're happy tears. So how do we bring cuteness and happiness into every show at the end, the big reveal? But as far as feeling, I had a client say to me a couple of months ago, we went out to coffee after, I finished a project with her, and she said, I feel like me in my house.
Hmm.
Like, I feel like myself, like I'm connected to myself, and it feels like me. That was the biggest compliment I think I've ever gotten. And that's because interpreting human beings is one of the hardest things to do, I think, because we're so multifaceted. And we're also different at different stages in our lives, but encapsulating a person where they are right now in their life and in their family is super important to me. And I want them to feel like their best selves in their homes.
What has living where you are now taught you about living well? Even what has designing for your clients and helping them to live well done to influence how you want to live well?
Living well and being here in Florida, I can't say enough how good it feels to be able to go outside at all times, all year round, and be
Mm.
surrounded by nature. I have this app now that tells me what birds are
Yeah.
singing. And,
We have that
I just,
too.
do you have it,
My
Merlin?
husband is a birder, so he's like really
Oh,
big. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I'm just like, I get to do this, and the way that it's so good for you to go outside, be part of nature, take a walk, go for a bike ride, hold hands with your kids and walk down the street together at any time, anywhere in the state is such a sense of freedom and joy.
Hmm.
So that I think is what I want people to feel when they're at their Florida home. And home anywhere, actually, because when I say if you're living in Chicago and you walk into your home designed by us, and we did just design a home in Chicago, I want it to feel that vacationing spirit.
If a home could borrow this vacation spirit and they're not in a place where that aesthetically makes the most obvious sense, what does that look like to you?
We have an investigatory process that we go through with our clients, and we find out from them with questionnaires and collaborative Pinterest boards and phone calls and interviews, what feels good to them, what feels like vacation to them. It's different for everyone. For me, it is being by the ocean. It's hearing the waves. It's having my feet in the sand. It's listening to the palm trees in the breeze. And it's having the sun on my skin. And how you translate that into interior design is my interpretation is bringing all of those elements together that give me that feeling. For me, it's soft fabrics, it's soft upholstery, it's soft things under my feet, it's flowing elements throughout, it's lighting that feels handcrafted and elements that feel like they come from the earth. It's those things that make me feel like I'm at the beach, or that feeling I get when I'm taking a walk with my kids on the beach.
I would love to have you go ahead and share how people can stay in touch with you, connect with you in case they would like to work with you, all the things.
Absolutely. So the best way to reach me is go to kristahome.com, and you'll find an email address there on our Contact Us page, or at Krista Home on Instagram. I have my own personal Instagram now that I just started called Krista.Alterman.
Well, Krista, this has been so fun. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and hear a little bit more about your work and your philosophy, and I appreciate you taking the time.
It was an honor, Allie. Thank you for having me on. I want to come back again.